increasingly organisations are recognising that the outsourcer, the outsource advisor are not the only two parties that need to make an outsourcing deal work. The client themselves, the organisation themselves have a key responsibility. They've got to have the right attitude. They've got to go into it in the spirit of partnership. If they just go in trying to beat up the supplier, get the best price, and then throw all the work over to the outsource provider, the contract will fail, the deal will fail. They've got to recognise that it takes two to make a relationship work. So you've got to have that partnerial attitude. You've got to have the right governance structures. You've got to manage the end-to-end process and look at the governance of the overall process, not just a governance structure to check on the supplier and make sure they're doing the right things. So yes, I think it is increasingly important for organisations to recognise that there's a major element focused on their behaviours and their attitudes to the outsourcing deal. As advisors, we certainly try to make sure the organisation themselves know that they have a key responsibility. Often they're asking us, just help us with the contract, help us with the RFP, help us with the negotiation. But increasingly we're saying, well, actually we need to sit down with you and talk through what it's going to look like, what governance structures you're going to need, how you're going to interact with the supplier afterwards, how you're going to make sure it's a partnership and not just an adversarial supplier-customer relationship. What role senior management needs to play in this during the deal and after the deal's been signed and the contract's going. Clients typically recognise that we, the outsourcing advisors, can help in vendor selection, contract negotiation. They don't always realise the role we can play in setting up the new retained organisation, the vendor management capability, the infrastructure, the team they need, the skills they need, the capabilities, the processes, and also helping in the transition and the stabilisation of the contract. But I think it's our role to advise them that that is a key area where we need to stay involved if we're really to help the contract over its life cycle and not just getting the contract signed. For many contracts with outsource providers, there is little incentive for the outsource provider to reduce heads. But it's very clear the organisation wants the outsource provider to reduce heads for the cost to come down. And the end goal has got to be effectively to eliminate the shared service centre, whether it's a captive or an outsourced shared service centre. Because ultimately, transaction processing, it should be a lights out thing. If you look at purchase to pay, if it's all set up correctly, there is no role for the back office finance. It should be all self-service, automated matching, automated payments. So the question is, what's the incentive for an outsourcer to move aggressively to that model? And it needs to happen in the contract. They need to be incentivised in the contract. There needs to be a gain share mechanism so that they are incentivised to reduce heads and to keep some of the benefits from that cost reduction. It needs to be in the partnership that you have with the outsource provider. There needs to be a long-term relationship where they see that that is going to be the end game. But it's not easy, and probably something like half of all contracts have no gain share mechanism in them. Often when we talk to organisations, the exam question they think they're setting for us is, how can we outsource this, let's say, finance function of maybe 500 heads? The reality is outsourcing the right solution? If you have 500 heads, is there a possibility that that could be 200 heads within a 9-month period by aggressively implementing self-service and web this and that and automation, workflow, and so on and so forth? So you need to think of any back office transformation as having maybe 8 levers for transformation. You need to look at those 8 levers, and I mentioned them in the plenary session. You need to think about eliminate, simplify, automate, standardise, consolidate, offshore, outsource, and then continuously improve. Outsourcing and shared services, yes, it's about consolidation, it's about the outsourcing, it's about offshoring, but don't forget the eliminate, simplify, automate, standardise. Now, you don't necessarily need to do all of that elimination, simplification, standardisation before outsourcing. There may be many instances where it would take years and years and you want to get access to the labour arbitrage immediately. But sometimes it makes sense to do some of that stuff before outsourcing or offshoring or sharing in a captive centre. So you do need to think about the whole holistic approach. Are we going to use the 8 levers? When are we going to use the 8 levers? What's the order? That's the tricky bit.